Even businesses that don't look like they are relationship businesses are relationship businesses.
If you don't have a relationship with somebody, that is just a thin layer that can be washed away very quickly.
You have this idea that you need to have clarity before you do it. You actually get clarity by doing it.
When your talent intersects with your passion, it intersects with a market demand.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Jeff Munn. Welcome to another episode of the Pick Now podcast. My guest today, Scott Millson, has an amazing background. We were colleagues a long time ago at Hewitt Associates. Scott has been in the Navy, very foundational for you, I believe, Scott. Founded his own company, sold his company. He is now an author, a keynote speaker. Scott, looking forward to diving in deep with you today. Welcome to the Pick Now podcast.
100%. Thank you so much for having me on, Jeff. It was great to reconnect with you a year or so ago, or maybe 2 years ago. And so I've just appreciated all of our discussions and look forward to today's as well.
Yeah. So I think probably from the standpoint of my listeners, the time we spent together at Hewitt is probably the most boring part of the background, even though I think we both recognize how foundational it was for each of us. Yeah. But, as I think about a good starting point, maybe it's Sagio. Can you tell people a little bit about Sagio and this idea of this was during the internet craze in the late 90s, and we were all going to be billionaires. Yeah. And this idea of a startup within this larger, stodgier firm. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. You nailed it with stodgy. And I love it. I am who I am today because of Hewitt Associates. It is my foundation. Everything I am today, not only as a person and a professional, but just as any form of a leader, as any type of a communicator, as any type of salesperson, I am because of my experience at Hewitt Associates. It was truly foundational, but it was a large Midwestern consulting company. And with that came
founded by actuaries.
Founded by actuaries. So, so it was just, the ability to turn on a dime was a little bit slower. It was a larger company, partnership oriented. And so, there was difficult sometimes to make some of those transitions. Well, .com rolls around and, late 90s. And there was this idea that we were going to start this new business that was going to be founded on this thing called the interweb. And we were going to sell health insurance and how that was going to be. And so I remember my very first partner meeting. So I go to my very first partner meeting, wide-eyed, walking in, meeting all these people that I'd heard of before. And Tom Schmitz, who was ultimately going to be the CEO of this spinoff, pulled me aside and asked me to join him on it. And I'm, again, go back to wide-eyed. I'm like, yes, I don't even know what I'm saying yes to, but let's do it. But then I sat through the next day and I'm hearing about this business plan and what we're going to do and how things are going to be different, et cetera. And I was just drawn in. But I was drawn in mostly because of the business model and what was being considered. But most of all, it was the people. It was the people that he had surrounded himself with that said, here's going to be the leadership team that is going to take this thing forward. And I jumped at the opportunity to say yes. And it was tremendous. I never in my life, I think, have I seen an organization adapt as quickly as we had to adapt. And again, back to your stodgy comment, that wouldn't have happened inside of Hewitt. So the idea of setting this aside and saying we're going to run it outside of it. Now, there was also a financial element, let's spin this off, let's take it public during the whole .com run up. And obviously .bomb happened within a few years of that. And so we ultimately got folded back in, and some might label it a failure. I view it as probably one of the greatest experiences of my career.
Well, it became pretty foundational for a lot of future things, both with Hewitt and Alight and so on. So it was, I don't consider it a failure. It was early.
Yeah. Thank you for the clarification. That's probably my wounds that are speaking there. People,
well, I remember at the time, everyone kind of coming back, tails between their legs. It's
we had a scarlet S on our chest. We kind of marched back in, and it was. You're right. It wasn't a failure because I do think it was just ahead of its time. If you roll forward, so this was 2000. By 2010, 2015, there were two handfuls of companies that were doing the exact same thing that we tried doing in 1999. It just was ahead of its time. And again, also bolstered by the fact of the whole .com and the false narratives that were out there around valuations and things like that just didn't play out. And so there was a host of socioeconomic and economic things that were also at play there. But the business that came out of it,
Hmm.
interestingly enough, 25 years later, still resides back in the former Hewitt Associates, now Alight business. That
Hmm.
is still their mid-market solution, and that was Sagio 25 years ago. So, and still employs a couple hundred people, and still services many, many clients. And so I'm proud of that. Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It felt like a failure, but at the end of the day, it was the launch point for a number of different things within that organization.
Well, and I think about your book, and I'm reminded of your book because it's right behind you, Frequency of Excellence.
There you go.
There's a lot of foundational experiences that you share in that book, and some of them
Yeah.
are from your time in the Navy, some of them are from Sagio. Like, what did you learn about yourself as a person and as a leader going through that experience?
Of writing the book.
No, not of writing the book, of Sagio.
Oh man, yeah, it was just again when you get surrounded by excellence, and that's the nature of my book. And I'm not trying to take too much of a tangent here to talk about the book because this is not that. But when you surround yourself with excellence, which I was within Sagio, like
Hmm.
Tom Schmitz was one of my greatest mentors. He was the CEO of
Yeah.
this organization. John Bouch was the chief commercial officer. I think that was his title back then. But to have the opportunity to work with John, I learned so much from John. I worked with one of the brightest minds I've ever met in healthcare, Tom Beauregard. And so I
Oh,
learned so
yeah.
much from working with Tom, like, all those various things. And it was more about, again, the people that Tom had surrounded said, this is going to be the team that we're going to work with. So
Hmm.
I learned so much. Like my learning curve was 90 degrees. Like I was just learning something new every single day. And it did shape who I am again as a communicator, as a salesperson, as an entrepreneur, as a leader. Everything came from that experience. And so, if you gave me a chance to do it again, I'd do it again. And it was
Yeah.
tough. I lost a lot of hair. I had a full head of hair before we started that project, and it was difficult. We worked unbelievable hours to try to prop that thing up, but I wouldn't change it for anything.
Yeah, one of my mentors, Frank Roque, who hired me at
Mhm.
Hewitt, he was the general counsel
Yes, he was.
of
Yeah.
Sagio, and I remember talking with him a lot during the whole process and during the
Yeah.
coming back and all of that, and how foundational it was, and how excited everybody was. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that founder energy was just really
Yeah.
present.
Yeah. And I think the one of the greatest gifts I got is it healed a scar for me. And so
Hmm.
a little bit of background there is so my father was Harvard MBA, graduated from Harvard, went to work for Arthur Andersen prior to obviously Enron. And so,
Yeah.
just had an unbelievable foundation. And he decided that he was going to leave corporate America and that kind of side of things, and launch his own retail company. So he did,
Hmm.
picked us up, moved us from the Midwest down to Florida, and had a great run at it right up until Sam Walton came to town and pretty much uh, crushed him. And so, here he is
Yeah.
towards the end of his career. He was probably when Sam Walton came to town, he was probably early 50s. So he's thinking, I got another
Uh-huh.
10 years to run this out. And he had to shut it down. And so
Yeah.
here I am watching the man, my hero, the smartest man I believe that I'd ever met, struggle in the latter part of his year, Harvard MBA trained, and he's looking for temp jobs because he had to shut down his business and nobody wanted to
Wow.
hire a early 50s CFO that hadn't been in accounting or hadn't done anything corporate finance in quite some time aside from running his own business. So he struggled mightily, and
Hmm.
that left me with a pretty good scar. I remember writing a paper my senior year at Florida. I went to the University of Florida, and I was in a finance class, and we were supposed to write a paper on this business model, and it was a convenience store or something like that. And
Uh-huh.
I destroyed the business model. I was like, this is terrible. You don't want to do this. Like it was just a paper about my scars. And it was like,
Yeah.
this is not what you want to do. There's too many risks associated with this. How are you going to fend off this competition, et cetera? And so that was really at that point, I was like, I'm never going to do my own thing. I'm not going to own my own business because of that experience. Sagio
Wow.
erased that. Sagio
Uh-huh.
allowed me to experience the other side of that. And it really
Uh-huh.
healed a lot of those open wounds. They were scars still, right? And so they still helped me propelled me forward and what not to do, and some of the lessons learned from my father. But Sagio was a great remedy for me. It was a nice correction to some of the past ills that I had found.
So even though it failed,
Yeah,
and I'm putting air quotes on that for those who are listening,
yeah,
it still helped you heal. I mean,
yeah,
that I think is really instructive, because I do think
yeah,
you can fail for many reasons,
yeah,
and not many of them have to do with you personally. A lot of times it's
yeah,
it's the market conditions, it's the Sam Walton coming in, it's the market not being ready, whatever it
yeah,
happens to be. And to be able to like put yourself wholeheartedly into something, knowing it might fail, and knowing that failure might not have anything to do with you,
yeah.
it takes a certain kind of wiring.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I'm thankful for my father for laying a good foundation for me that would allow me to kind of recognize that over
Hmm.
time. In the moment,
Yeah.
I didn't see it because I just saw him struggle, and didn't want that. I just said, that's not what I want the end of my career to look like. But he laid a good foundation for me to know that you got to continue to grow, you got to continue to adapt, you have to continue to learn new things. And so that Sagio was that opportunity for me, and it did erase a lot of those challenges that I think I had seen him go through.
Well, and Sagio wasn't the first time you were an entrepreneur, and or it wasn't the last time, I should say, that you were an
Correct. Yeah.
entrepreneur in all this, right?
Yeah.
So walk us through, Sagio gets folded back into Hewitt. A period of years pass, a couple things happen. You found Milson James. Like, walk us through that.
Yeah. So there was kind of a part two of that. So I left. So Hewitt went. So we got folded back in.
Uh huh.
One other thing that I failed to mention, one of the big challenges that we had was we had to give up our partnership in order to leave Sagio. So I made partner, lifelong goal, and then had to give it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was an interesting time too. My wife kept looking at me like, you're nuts. But that aside, but so we get folded back in, we then go public. So Hewitt goes then public in 2002. And I loved Hewitt Associates, et cetera, but things started to change. And so I just was like, it's time for me to kind of experience something new. And so I went to a mini Hewitt, lack of a better
Hmm.
term, a very entrepreneurial company. The founders and the people that I worked with daily were just, they were just ripe with all the lessons that they learned in entrepreneurship. And so I was a sponge, and I learned a great deal from them. They kind of added extra to what I learned at Sagio and taught me more about different market sizes. And so I then took that knowledge as well and then launched Milson James, and
Hmm.
did that in 2010. And it was a great experience. Again, I think I wouldn't have done that without Sagio, and I wouldn't have done that without PlanSource, which was the company that I was with just after Hewitt. But what's interesting, I'm not sure I still would have done it without a little bit of a nudge,
Uh huh.
meaning that PlanSource was going through a bit of a reorg, and they came to me and said, "Hey, we're gonna have kind of a change of your role, and you were doing X, we're gonna have you do Y." And I just wasn't quite comfortable with it, and so
Hmm.
I just said, you know what, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to go ahead and launch my own thing, because I've been thinking about it for a while, and you've now kind of created an opportunity for me to want to do that. Which was, again, helpful, because on my own, I'm not sure I would have left a handsome executive salary and things that I had going and want to go find something new. But with an outside push, I then had the comfort and confidence to be able to do that.
So, Scott, what year was that?
2010.
Okay. Um, yeah, and I'm, as I'm doing the math, I'm thinking, were you in the last partner class at Hewitt?
Second to last. Second to
Second to
last.
last. I was in the
Yeah.
last one. So my first partner meeting, it was like, oh, and by the way, we're going public. Like, all
Right.
that stuff we were telling you about owner compensate, blah, blah, blah. Yeah,
Yeah.
like forget that.
Yeah. You're now
Read
going to
this
be a W
binder
2 employee.
instead.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting timing. Yeah. And I had my own version of what you were talking about. I had been thinking about going out on my own as a coach for a while, and, had a good job at Fidelity. And it was like, I mean, I will call it the curse of good enough now when I talk with people, because
Yeah.
like when you got something that's going well, it's really hard to
Yeah.
leave it on your own. And
Yeah.
then Fidelity laid me and my boss and like 150 other people off on the same day. And suddenly I had that. Mine was more of a shove off the cliff than a nudge, but that same kind of idea that ends up turning into the next thing.
Yeah, and I'm curious. So I'm going to turn the tables here. I'm curious. Do you think you would have launched it on your own without that push off of the cliff, or would you have just stayed there, or maybe gone found something similar at another organization?
I I like to think that I would have. I don't know for sure because
Yeah,
the way Fidelity was structured and the way the long-term incentives were structured, like I had a big vesting event coming about 6 months after I got laid off, which
yeah,
is what made me so attractive for layoff. I mean,
yeah,
um, I the story that I tell myself is I would have stuck it out till that and then left.
yeah,
But I don't know that for sure because every
yeah.
year you get more long-term incentives that are have a 4-year vesting schedule. And I joke with people, I was on the 2-year plan. I'm just going to do this 2 more years for about 5 years.
Yeah, yeah, right.
And
Yeah,
yeah, so I don't know. I'm thankful that it happened. Things work out the way they work out, and it's an interesting exercise to think about what if it had been different, but it wasn't.
yeah, yeah. And so
Yeah.
you roll with those punches, and I'm much like you. I had this idea for a business even when I was within Sagio. Actually, I take that back. After Sagio got folded back in, it just started going in my mind of like, I think I could do something, but I'm not certain. And
Yeah.
so I just didn't. And so we call it fear, whatever. It just kind of stopped me. And I was like, I'm not doing that. And then when I went to Co-Advantage Plan Source, again, that same in my mind, but probably still wouldn't have done it until I got that nudge. And it was probably
Right.
more of a nudge. It wasn't quite off a cliff, but it was a good nudge of, hey, things are going to be pretty different. Your role's not going to be available anymore. Here's what we're going to do. And so I just, I needed that nudge. Otherwise, I don't think I would have jumped on my own.
Well,
I went
this
that
is a
reason.
really interesting. I'm gonna plug for a second why this is called the Pick Now podcast, and
Yeah.
I think there's this thought that people have, whether they are career changers or business owners or founders or whatever. Anytime you're making a big decision, you have this idea that you need to have clarity before you do it,
Mhm.
and you
Yeah.
actually get clarity by doing it. And
100%.
you just, whether it's like 50% of the information or 80% of the information, you just have to jump.
Yeah.
And if you're waiting for clarity, it's never going to happen.
Yeah. And I think what I focused on as I was launching the business is I said, look, and I had been trained on this at Hewitt Associates. They did a class. It was called Charting Our Course, Charting Your Course. I don't know if you'll remember this.
I
And in it,
roughly, yeah.
yeah, they introduced this thing called a career best, and like when you're at your top of your game. And so it was essentially when your talent intersects with your passion and intersects with a
Hmm.
market demand. And so I was
Yeah.
thinking about doing my own thing. It wasn't so much what, but it was more like I need whatever I do, it needs to make sure that it's tapping into my talent, it's tapping into my
Yeah.
passion, and I believe that there's a market demand out there. But I didn't have all the answers. I just knew that if I was going to, in my case, I felt like my talent was I'm good at managing clients. That'd been
Uh-huh.
all I'd done really at Hewitt Associates. I loved solving client problems, which was the passion. And I believed that what the market needed was an objective voice. And so
Uh-huh.
I didn't get into analysis paralysis on the specifics of it. I just knew that whatever I did, if I hit those three, I think I'd be successful. And so that was really kind of the launch point for me. And that was even crystallized at a lunch I had with a friend of mine. And in that lunch, it just became crystal clear that, okay, if I hit those three, no matter what the what is, I think I can be successful. And then everything started kind of falling into place from there.
Yeah, fantastic. I love that idea of you don't necessarily have to know the destination to start, but if you
Right.
know the direction, you can
Yeah.
do a lot. And that
Yeah.
can
I
guide
mean,
you toward, hey, I don't know exactly what this is going to be, but I'm willing to
yeah.
start.
And be willing to adapt. And that's, the
Yeah.
business plan worship is one of the worst things you can do as an entrepreneur, of saying, this is specifically what I'm going to do, and I'm going to anchor on this, and I don't care what else I learn. This is the answer. And it was like Sagio, right? I mean, I remember going in Sagio, it felt like on a weekly basis, we were adapting our business model. And that
Right.
may, frustrate some people, but we had to continue to evolve and adapt. And where we ended up, that is now 25 years later, a business that still runs inside of Alight, was radically different than where we started, but we needed to adapt and adjust that. And so I knew that whatever I launched doing at Millson James may not be the final answer, but it was going to be the initial answer. And I just needed to kind of stick with it and adapt.
So tell me about Millson James and your experience there.
Yeah, just a tremendous experience. Again, first time that I kind of sat in that chair, not just
and what was Millson James for people who like tell me about what the business was, what you were doing.
Yeah, so we were HR technology advisors essentially, and so it was for us to be able to bring that objective voice to the market, helping employee benefit agencies. So our distribution was through employee benefit agencies for them. For themselves and also for their customers, to make us available to help their customers figure out HR tech, whether it was a ben admin system, an HR system, HCM, payroll, time and attendance, like all the tech things that touched HR, we were going to be the objective voice. And so we would sit before a customer, whether it was an employee benefit agency or their customer, their end customer, we were just providing objective advice and opinion. We weren't getting compensated on it. We were being paid by the agency. So there's no ulterior motive here of, hey, I'm trying to get you over to ADP or PlanSource or anybody else, and I'm going to get kickback on that. I drew a hard wall and said, we're not doing that. And so that was that objective voice.
So you were basically you were getting paid for consulting projects? Is that what?
Yeah. We were straight. We were on retainers with the employee benefit agencies that just make us available to your customer.
Gotcha.
Our 98% of our revenue came on basically retainers with the agencies. And yeah, so it was a nice scalable business. I mean, it was a very people intensive, but the more people I could bring in, the more clients that we could ultimately serve. And so we had a great run at it. Started off small and just grew over time. It never got to be too big. I really was not looking to be Hewitt Associates Part 2.
Wanted to create a nice how big did you grow to, Scott?
Yeah, we were, I think at max, I think I had 5. So we were never that large. But we had a nice niche business. We knew our customers really well. They knew us. They had confidence in us. And so we had a nice run at that.
Yeah.
And then the end, which I'm going to kind of jump maybe where a question might be coming, is, so what's the exit? I never had any intention of selling Millson James. Like I thought I had built a great lifestyle company. Didn't think, we had nice growth. We had year over year, we had nice growth, but didn't ever think that I was creating an asset that would be marketable. And so how that happened was one of my former clients was an agency that I'd known for many years. They got bought by Hub International several years prior. And when they got bought by Hub, they came to me and said, hey, we are now part of a large organization. We no longer need your services. And, again, I had a relationship with them before, and I was like, fine, I'd love to work with you again sometime down the road, but congratulations on your sale. And we'll keep in touch.
Yeah. Well, so I want to interrupt you there. Yeah. Just tell people a little bit about Hub International.
Yeah. So Hub International I think it's now the 5th largest agency broker in the world of property and casualty and employee benefits. My interaction with them and my relationships was all on the employee benefit side. So we worked with organizations that could be acquired by Hub, and in this particular case, they did get bought by Hub. But Hub's a very acquisitive organization. I think they're now at probably 2.5 billion in revenue. So nice sized organization, and again, they're just highly acquisitive, and they acquired my client, which was my interaction with them.
Right.
And so, years go by, I circle back to the CEO of Florida, who once was the principal of the agency that got acquired by Hub as they started rolling up agencies in Florida. And I went back to him. I said, hey, you've been inside of Hub now for a while. You know what we can do. I think there's a time for us to work together again. And he let me finish my pitch, and he came back and he was like, I think we should acquire you. And I looked at him and I was like, that may be the dumbest thing you do, because all of my customers are Hub competitors. And so the moment that you acquire me, all of my revenue is going to run out the door, and you will have acquired an empty asset because everybody's going to fire me. And he said, I think you're underestimating the relationship that you have with those agencies. I think they will stick with you, and they're not going to care as much that you're inside of Hub. I disagreed with them, and we had many debates back and forth. At the end of the day, He was right. We got
Mm.
acquired in July of 2017. I immediately went out and notified all of my customers that, hey, I'm now part of Hub. I know that creates some competition, but we're going to put up some walls here and we'll continue to serve you. But we are now going to be owned by Hub, and you're going to get invoices from Hub, not from Millson
Uh-huh.
James any longer. And we didn't get fired by anybody. We kept all of our customers. Over time, I think one or two started to leave as they got acquired. But by
Mm-hmm.
and large, I think there was only one agency that really had any issue with it, and we did lose them about a year and a half in. But by and
Mm-hmm.
large, we kept all of our customers, which was great.
So you've been very self-effacing about your career and, a lifelong B student, et cetera, et cetera. But that, I mean, just what you've described there, that has to feel pretty good that like, hey, they value their relationship with me, with
Yeah,
Scott, more than they value this other thing. Like, talk
yeah.
about what that meant to you.
It meant a ton. And again, I was happy to be proven wrong because
Yeah.
I literally went into every one of those conversations waiting to kind of be browbeaten of just, I can't believe you're doing this. We loved working with you, but now you're owned by a competitor. And
Yeah.
I'm glad you kind of said it that way. It was very affirming to the relationship that I had with these people, that they were willing to stick with me, even though now I'm owned by a competitor. And they knew that I'd be true to my word, which is I'm never going to create a situation in which you, agency ABC, are competing against Hub and feel like that I may share information with Hub to help
Mm-hmm.
you get out. That's not who I am. That's not how I was raised. That's not how I was built. And they trusted me on my word, even though there was legal documentation that said I wouldn't do those things. There still could be a concern, but there wasn't. They were literally willing to put faith in me, in the relationships that we had, and knew that I would operate with integrity. And so we did, and we were able to continue to work with those agencies.
I think even businesses that don't look like they are relationship businesses are relationship businesses.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what that's meant for you and how that informs your values, because your
Yeah.
relationships, I mean, you've talked about, some of them go back a quarter century or more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I am everything because of the relationships I formed. I mean, candidly, if I really unpack the reason why I wrote the book, there was multiple, but one of the key ones is I wanted to shine a light on the people that so willingly poured into me, and
Yeah.
they formed relationships, and whether it was mentorship or whether it was just a friendly relationship. But I am who I am today because of those relationships. And I think you just said it very well. Regardless of industry, regardless of any type of walk of life you're in, it's all about relationships. How you treat people, how you respect people or not, how you just interact with them, how you care for them. All that
Mm-hmm.
feeds into a relationship, and that's what makes people want to work with you. It's not,
Right.
you might have a great widget maker, you might have some of the best services, but if you don't have a relationship with somebody, that is just a thin layer that can be washed away very quickly.
Right. And I think when I, kind of unpack that, what does that mean? What is it about the relationship that is so important? I think it comes down to trust.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, Scott, I don't really understand the technicality of what you're telling me, but
Yeah.
I trust you. So we're going to go
Mm-hmm.
with you.
Yeah. And again, to go back to how I learned that and the importance of trust came from Hewitt. So
Yeah.
there's a book. It's somewhere over my shoulder here. There's a book that it was called Trusted Partnerships, and it was
Yeah.
it was a great book. And so I take that back. There was two: Trusted Partnership, and then there was another called Trusted Advisor.
The Trusted Advisor. Is David Maister the Trusted
Yes,
Advisor one? Yeah.
yeah. There were three.
Yeah.
There were three authors of that, and he was one of them. And I
Uh-huh.
think it was Brian Caffarelli, who many people
Oh,
know
yeah.
in the industry.
Yeah.
And so Brian, I think, is the one that put that in my hands and said, "You need to read this book." And in that whole book was on trust. And I lived it on a daily basis within Hewitt Associates. But one of the main things I took from that book, and I still use it today, I talk about it frequently, is they made it a numerical equation to determine the level of trust within a relationships. And it was
Mm.
in the numerator, it was credibility, reliability, and intimacy. So come up with a scale of 1 to 10. What is your credibility? What is your reliability? And what is your level of intimacy, which is kind of attention, like how much attention are you giving to somebody?
Yeah,
How
and
well,
an unusual word to put on
yeah,
a business
yeah.
relationship.
And
Yeah.
candidly, as I've talked about it, I've thought about trying to change the I, just because
Uh-huh.
it does give a little bit of a different sense, but it's a great word because
Yeah.
there's a professional intimacy. We're not talking about a personal intimacy here, but we're
Right.
talking about professional intimacy of how well do I know Jeff Munn? How well
Yeah.
does
Can
he
I
know
be
me?
vulnerable with you? Right.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
What's the level of authenticity? And so it's that in the numerator, and then it's divided by your self-orientation. And
Uh-huh.
so you measure those things on a scale of 1 to 10. You want that to be trust to be as high as possible. You got to have high credibility. You got to have high reliability. You got to have high intimacy, and you got to have low self-orientation. And if you do those things, trust comes naturally. And so that came from that book. I absolutely love it. I used it consistently. It's a great way to think about it.
Yeah. When you think about, I'm thinking about like the kind of the intimacy, the vulnerability piece, and there are times on all of our journeys where
Yeah.
we, we either mess up or we have to do something and we don't know if it's going to work or not. And those formative experiences are not usually the ones that look the best from the
Mm-hmm.
outside. They're the ones
Yeah.
where we're struggling a little bit, where we're uncertain. Like, what are one or two of those that come to mind for you as you think
Yeah.
about, your career and how you developed as a person, as a lead and as a leader, where you like really learned something about yourself?
Yeah. So I think that three of the most powerful words we can use in leadership and in sales and building relationships, et cetera, is I don't know. And
Mm,
so I think when you say I don't know, it creates an authenticity, a vulnerability that you don't have to have the answers to everything. Now, look, you can't go into build a relationship and go, I don't know, I don't know, I don't
all
know.
right.
Nobody's going to want to work with you if you don't know anything. But in the precise moments where you're faced with a situation of somebody's asking you for your opinion, and the overriding kind of drive there would be, I got to give an answer. I got to give a quick
Right.
answer. It's got to be complete answer. It needs to be perfect.
I
We
need to
try to
make it up. It
perfect.
needs to be confident.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And fake it till you make it. Just keep
Yeah.
going. And I think instead, if you can take the opportunity, if you're not really certain and you go, you know what, I'm not really sure of the answer to that. I'm going to do some research. I'm going to get back to you. Immediately, again, go back to that equation, the self-orientation just drops to zero. Now, all of a
Yeah.
sudden, you've got this high trust that comes from the vulnerability that you have as a leader to say, I don't know. And I'll give you two examples that I love. One is a personal one, and then one was a kind of a business-oriented one. The personal one was I had to have shoulder surgery like 25 years ago. And I had some pain in my shoulder. And so I went to a doctor here in town, and he says, yeah, I think you got a tear in your labrum. And so I took that same film and I sent it to a friend of mine who's an orthopedic surgeon up in Philadelphia. And he was like, yeah, you definitely have a torn labrum. I went to a different one here in town and said, okay, because he recommended, hey, I'm in Philadelphia, you're down there. Let me give you a recommendation of somebody that I think would do good work. So I met with him, and he looks at the films and he goes, I don't think there's a tear, but you got an impingement in there. We still got to go clean some stuff up, but let's do that. And I'm like, okay,
Uh-huh.
I'm good. Whatever it takes so I can just get some mobility back and things.
Yeah.
And so he goes into the surgery. He comes to me while I'm in the recovery room, and he goes, I was wrong. He said, you had a pretty sizable tear and I missed it on the film. And I thought the vulnerability for somebody to own that made
Mm-hmm.
me recommend him 100 times over. Like anybody that ever comes to me and says, I got a shoulder set, I said, you need to go to Randy Schwarzberg. Go to
Yeah.
Randy because he's going to be honest with you. And so his vulnerability, he could have come in and said, yeah, we got the impingement, or, hey, I found a little tear, we fixed it. He totally owned it and said, I missed this. Like, I'm
Yeah.
so glad that your friend highlighted that for me, and that he recommended me to you, and that he put you in my care, but I missed it originally, but I'm glad I was able to get in there and fix it. And I was like,
Uh-huh.
dude, I'll work with you. I will have you work on my mother, anybody in
Yeah.
my family, because there's a
Yeah.
vulnerability that existed there with that. The second one, and you may remember this, it was a gathering in the desert. Hewitt had those client
Yeah.
conferences, and
Uh-huh.
they had a gentleman come and speak to us. His name was Captain Mike Abershoff. Actually, it's one of the books over my shoulder. He came and speak. at that conference. And he took over a ship in the US Navy that was one of the worst performing ships in the entire Navy. It was really bad, like very high turnover, very low morale. Like it was terrible. And in 1 year, punchline, kind of stealing the thunder, he turned it around to be the number one performing ship in the world. And he did it by basically going in there and saying, I don't know. I don't have
Uh-huh.
all the answers here. You guys are living this on a daily basis. Tell me what you would do if you were in my shoes. What would you change? And just by opening that up and becoming authentic, and really building the relationships with people, that he listened to what they said and he implemented a lot of the things that the sailors, even if they were the lowest ranking sailor, brought to him. It just made him an authentic leader. And so I think that opportunity to use that strategically and say, hey guys, y'all know more than I do, and help me get better, help us all get better, share with me. I think it opened up just a whole new world to him. And in 1 year with the same people, turned it around to be the number one performing ship in the fleet. It was amazing.
Why do you think that's so hard for people to do?
Yeah, I think there's ego is probably three simple letters I think that get in our way. Is
Yeah.
I think we want to be seen as an expert, and we think that will weaken our position and weaken our ego and weaken our ability to lead people by admitting that I don't have all the answers. Yeah, so it's I think it's ego. And Colin Powell is a hero of mine. I you know loved everything that man stood for, what he said. I will devour any content that I can read about his life and his legacy and how he led. And he'll be the first one to admit that the initial war in Iraq was based on bad intelligence, and he made a bad decision. And his ability to
Hmm.
kind of own that, set the ego aside. Again, everybody
Yeah.
thinks military is command and control, and you have to be in control, and you have to have all the answers. And for that gentleman to say, I made a mistake, I misread the intelligence, and I knew in my gut what the right answer was, but I moved forward and spoke at the United Nations and said that there are weapons of mass destruction and we have to go get them. And turns out, as you well know, there wasn't any weapons of mass destruction, but he owned it, and
Right.
he owned that,
Right.
and he was able to set his ego aside and not have that be a driving force. And so I think ego gets in our way a good bit.
Yeah. When I'm working with people who are running companies, and these are they're not quite Milson James, but they're not Fortune 500 either. They may have 50 employees or 100 employees,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of struggle when they get to this point of, oh yeah, I have built everything myself, but I can no longer do everything myself. I
Yeah.
have to bring
Yeah.
in a real finance person, a real salesperson, a real product person, and I have to trust them, and I have
Mhm.
to trust that they know more than I do on this. And it's a
Yeah.
really vulnerable time for people. And a lot
Yeah.
of people resist that and think, well, I'm the founder, I'm the CEO, I'm supposed to know everything. And what you're pointing out there is, actually the truth is the opposite.
Yeah. And it's really hard. And I will say I have struggled with it at times. So when I might even say in retrospect, Milson James didn't grow as much as it could have been because I was so focused on the deliverable and what we were doing and how we were communicating with our customers that sometimes it was like, okay, I have a hard time of trusting some other people to be able to deliver the same level that I would want it to. And so that's I wish that was different. And I think I learned it a lot during the sale to Hub, because as I got bought by Hub, Hub's intention was to take me and let me run employee benefits for them for the state of Florida. So I was going to have to leave a lot of what I was doing at Milson James and trust the team to be able to deliver.
Hmm.
And in doing that, almost forced by Hub, I came to find out, like Margaret Godwin, who was one of the people that worked with me, she could run any customer, and
Uh-huh.
I backed away, allowed her to do it, and saw no drop off. And so it was a great
Uh-huh.
lesson for me in needing to be able to lean in your people and allow them to kind of soar. And they'll bump their, stub their toe every so often and bump their heads, but along the way they kind of figure it out. And I think they can learn from a lot of those challenges.
Well, and I think a lot of the magic in allowing your employee to do that is they're going to come up with things that you never thought of that are actually going to be way better than what you would have thought of.
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
both amazing and humbling at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So take us forward. So you sell Milson James to Hub. Like what, what,
Yeah.
and then at some point you move into, oh, I'm gonna step away. I'm gonna write a book. I'm gonna be a keynote
Yeah.
speaker. Like what's that transition look like, and how long does it take, and why, and all of that?
Yeah. So I was loving what I was doing. So the great news is, sometimes people go through an exit, go through a sale, and they're like, oh, I'm not really thrilled with where I am, or I'm not in
Yeah.
charge anymore. And so for whatever reason, some people struggle with that post exit. I didn't have that. I loved the people that I worked with. I loved the organization. So I was totally fine to keep doing it. But I reached a point that I think maybe we've talked about this, is the book From Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks.
Yeah.
It's a phenomenal book. And as I was reading that, I just got in a little bit of background on the book, is he talks about we have two curves of our life. And the first curve, we're striving to be the best. We're trying to be the best at X, Y, and Z. We're trying to become an owner, a partner, a president, whatever it is. You're striving to achieve those milestones. And we're putting in the hours, we're doing all those things. But there comes a point, if you don't find a second curve, that first curve begins to drop, and it will drive you into the ground if you don't find a second curve. And so I was kind of feeling that. I was losing a little bit of energy. I was losing a little bit of momentum. He talks about crystallized intelligence versus fluid intelligence, and you begin to lose your fluid intelligence as you age. And so I was feeling all those things. And I was like, I need to find a second curve. And so
Mm.
around COVID, I started writing a blog, which then ultimately led me to write the book. And I started writing a blog about the different lessons that were taught to me by mentors and all these people in my life. And I felt like it was time for me to share these lessons with others, because they were so instrumental in making me who I was. And any success I had came from those lessons, that it was time for me to share those with others and start squeezing the sponge that I had been collecting all this water and knowledge. And so I did. So I started writing that blog series, got really good feedback. And then I was like, you know what, maybe there's a book in this.
Uh-huh.
And it started to give me that second curve. And so as my time was coming towards an end, and I felt like, okay, it's time to retire and go do something different. I felt like the book was that natural launch point. And so I retired end of 2023 from Hub, gave me the opportunity to invest my time in writing a book, with the idea that the book was never going to be a New York Times bestseller, but it was going to launch a speaking career, and then ultimately into some coaching and mentoring and other things. But that was really kind of the launch point for me, was to be able to write that book, formalize my thoughts, and then kind of move forward. And so that's what the second curve has now been, is I'm here to help people grow and to learn, and to share the lessons that were so willingly shared with me.
Oh, that's fantastic. So tell us a little bit about the framework, because you've come up with a framework that you share in your talks, in the book. Like, walk us through that, and
Yeah.
maybe a little bit on why each of these 5 things is so valuable for people.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people write a book off of like a framework, and they include it in the
Uh-huh.
book. Mine came afterwards, because I wrote the book. I started doing
Uh-huh.
talking. People would always come up to me and they're like, okay, so like, what are things I can do differently? And, the name of my book is Frequency of Excellence. And so I talk about tuning in, which takes us back to the AM, FM radios in our cars, where
Yeah,
you had to play
sure.
with that knob, right? So you got to tune into the right frequency in order to get these lessons. And so people were asking me, like, how do I tune? Like, what's my tuner? And so I started giving it thought and a lot of reflection of, what is that? And so I
Hmm.
developed what I call the B5 framework that I talk about and share with others now. It's not necessarily in my book, but it's basically 5 B statements, 5 B action statements, that when you do that, you're able to tune in and be able to pick up on these lessons that are out there. And so they are to be intentional, which is
Mm.
about being intentional about people with whom you surround yourself. So that
Mm.
is what I did at Hewitt. I was surrounded by excellence, working with people like yourself and Brian Caffarelli and John Bausch and Tom Schmitz and all those types of people. When you surround yourself with excellence, I guarantee you will begin to pick up on things. It's the old
Hmm.
iron sharpens iron, or, show me your 5 closest friends and I'll show you your future.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
It's that kind
Yeah.
of thinking. So be intentional about people with whom you surround yourself. And then when you're intentional, be present, which is really
Mm.
hard today, because that stinking device that's inches from our fingertips at every moment, is we're
Right.
distracted, easily distracted. And we're not, when we're with people, we're not as present as we need to be, and our minds are being drawn elsewhere, and we're distracted by things. And so it's just, to be present. And I've got practices and things I can share like that help you become more present,
Hmm.
but then also be curious, which I think is a God-given ability that we lose as we age. Go back to the ego, right? We don't need to be curious because I got all the answers. Like I know this. But if
Right.
you can be insatiably curious when you're sitting across from somebody that is doing something that you really like, or like when I sat with Brian Caffarelli, I was like a 4-year-old child. I was like, why? Why'd you do
Oh,
that?
every time I got in a room with that guy, it was just
Yeah,
like, yeah, it's
right.
like,
And
how
so
do you do
we've got
this?
to find that 4-year-old curiosity again.
Uh-huh.
I believe it's a pre-existing condition, and we've just lost it. We're not as
Yeah.
curious as we could be. So when you're curious, it just helps you grow considerably because you're looking for those things. And then being bold is about leaning into your failures. That's kind of the fourth one. And again, the scars that we have, if they stay as an open wound, you'll never learn from them. But as soon as a scar forms, it serves as a reminder of why you went through something, and just don't lose the struggle. Like you went through that
Hmm.
struggle, find the benefit in that struggle. And then the last one is about being reflective, and that is to pause. It's the power of the pause, and it's to take a moment and just pause, let it shift from the prefrontal cortex to the neocortex, leverage that hippocampus to let it get back there. So now it's in long-term memory that you can pull from it and use it. So when Brian
Right.
Caffarelli would do something that was exceptional, I would just like pause, allow that to get into my long-term memory. And now the next time I'm selling something, guess what? I'm going to be able to pull that back and use it. So you've got to take that moment to pause. And so those 5 things I think become our tuner. And so I've
Hmm.
created, it's kind of a circle, these 5 things, kind of a flywheel. And that is our tuner that allows us to tune into that frequency.
Yeah, I love all of those. And I think the two that resonate the most with me are the reflective part, taking time to look back
Yeah.
and say, okay, why did that go well? Why did that
Yeah.
not go well? What can I learn from it? To really be unattached to it, right? And
Yeah.
that curiosity, I think, ties in with the lack of attachment too. Because if we can just be curious,
Hmm.
we can learn so much. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, I think one of the superpowers that not many people have anymore is the willingness to reconsider your opinion.
Hmm.
And obviously, there are a lot of things going on that are much broader than you and me. That, like, if we all just had the capacity to take in new information and change our minds sometimes,
Yeah.
I think our world would be a lot easier place to live in.
Beautifully said. Yeah. That's perfect.
Um, and I think, I want to come back to Brian Caffarelli, because I think, there are other people in the world like Brian Caffarelli, but you and I both know Brian, and maybe a few of our listeners have had experience with Brian. Like, he had these two things that operated side by side. One was he really knew how to do what he did. Like, he
Hmm.
was amazing at the sales process. But the other thing was he was aware of why he was amazing at the sales process. He was
Yeah.
aware of why he did everything that he did, and
Highly
he could
intentional.
teach it.
Yeah.
And it was just a beautiful thing to watch.
Yeah. And I think, and first of all, if Brian was on this call, he would hate everything we're saying.
I know. I could just see it's like,
He would,
oh, I don't
he would drive,
know.
oh, no, it's not me. No, you were really good at that, right? He would always flip it and say, oh, Scott, I learned so much from you. And I was like, okay, Brian. And so to that point, one of the things I loved most about Brian is his humility.
Hmm.
You would meet Brian Caffarelli and you would think that's the top salesperson at Hewitt, just because he was so likable. That's just natural
Yeah.
for him. But he was just so humble. Like he would be
Right.
so, he would defer to others, and he would be like, I'm not really sure I know the answer to this, but here's what I'm thinking. And it was like just that ability versus I got the answer. You guys
Yeah.
should listen to me. And I've seen a lot of salespeople that fall victim to that. Of again, they think that they have to have all the answers. But I think if you can take a step back and go, you know what, I'm not really sure. Let's play this out. Let me get onto a whiteboard. Let's just go figure this out together. There's just such humility that comes with that, and he's so authentic in how he does it. It's amazing. So if anything I've ever any sales situation I've been in, I'm always thinking of how would Brian do that, And
Right.
so And so it's those types of people. But I only get that because when I'm with him, I'm present and I'm curious with him, and then I'm reflective, like all those things. My brain is filled of Brian Caffarelli-isms,
Yeah.
because of how good he was and how reflective I think I've been able to be in working with him.
Yeah, Brian is one of the people that I actually like. I consider them, and Brian and I don't have many interactions, but I consider him to be a mentor. I consider, like, if I have a question and I reach out to Brian, I know he's going to answer it. And I think
Yeah.
we all have people like that in our lives. We were talking about a few of them before we even got on this call. And I'm just so grateful that, like, this is like Brian. I knew him and knew of him when I was at Hewitt, but
Yeah.
I actually got to know him better and to the level of considering him a mentor
Yeah.
10 years after I left Hewitt.
Yeah.
Like, he was just one of those kinds of people that if you connect and you're curious, it's like you can find those mentors at whatever stage you are in your career, and people are happy to share with you and give. And it's just very, very humbling for me.
Yeah. And I think, I believe that, I'm a huge fan and proponent of mentorship. And I think today there's a gap that exists and so I read this study that said that I think it was like 78% of people know that a mentor is important, but only 37% of people actually have a mentor.
Yeah.
And first of all, I don't know who the 22% is that says it's not a good thing, but that's for another time. But that gap that exists is, I think too often people want to make this a very formal, almost like a knighting ceremony that,
Right.
Jeff, you're going to mentor Scott. And you're looking to hang a certificate on the wall that says Jeff and Scott, they mentored, he was mentored by Jeff. And,
here's like, I have some sword to tap you on the shoulder when you have been mentored.
Right. And I think people overdo it. It's kind of funny. I spoke at the University of Central Florida a few weeks ago, and I really kind of harped on this because these are people going into their careers. And I'm like, please, if you do nothing else, if you walk away with nothing else today, find a mentor. When you start your employment, find a mentor. And I said, and don't overcomplicate it. I never went to Brian Caffarelli and said, will you mentor me? I've had probably 50 different mentors. And I never went to somebody and said, will you mentor me? It was just somebody that I saw that was doing something that I aspired to do. And I watched them.
That's it right
questions.
there.
Yeah. I asked questions and then a relationship developed over time that I think, well, first of all, Brian's too humble that if I said, Brian, did you mentor me? He would say no, of course. Right.
Yeah. I learned way more from you than right.
Yeah. Beauty's in the eyes of the beholder. If I think Brian was a mentor, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter whether Brian said that I was a mentee, which he would never say. He's too humble for that. But it doesn't, that even if the 49 other people that mentored me, that I would say that, even if you went to probably half of them, they would say, no, I didn't mentor Scott. But for me, I learned so much from them that I consider them a mentor. That's all you need. It only has to be in your eyes, not necessarily their eyes. And so it was funny at the end of that, I did a Q&A session at UCF, and somebody said, okay, so like when I go to meet, when I want to do a mentor, I just, what do I say to them? Like, how do I ask them to do it? And I said, well, the first thing you do is you don't ask them to be a mentor.
Yeah.
I said, that's like going on a first date saying, hey, let's get married. Like, you don't need to go there. Just go say, hey, can we grab coffee? I'd love to learn more about you. I'd love to learn more about your experiences. And hey, can I join you on that next sales call? Or can I join you in that meeting that you're going to have? And that's how mentorship develops. It's just this organic, can I just ride along and watch,
Right.
Because if you ask somebody, hey, will you mentor me? Like, that's off.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know. Yeah. I'm busy and
Right. So,
right. But if you just go to your point, one of the things that's been really helpful for me is if I see someone doing something that I'm interested in doing, I'll just ask them if I can ask about that. Like, that looks really cool. Are you willing to like talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
And most of the time people are like, yeah, sure, I would love to.
Yeah.
And then you end up having like a 2-hour lunch or something like that. And you look at the time and you think, where did the time go? That was fun. Let's do that again.
Yeah. Well, let's make it really real and personal. So I reached to you, maybe it was 3, 4, 5 months ago. And I said, Jeff, you've done a lot of coaching and mentoring. So I launched my book, did speaking, and now I'm being asked, hey, will you do some coaching with some people on our team, or will you do a little mentoring with some of the people? And I was like, well, I've not necessarily done that. So what did I do? I sent
Yeah.
you a message and I was like, hey, Jeff, you've done this. You're doing something I aspire to be doing more of. Can we talk? And you were just, again, because we had that relationship, you're like, sure. And
Yeah.
it's just, that's what you need to
Well,
do
and then
is,
we did it the other way too, Scott, because you were like,
yeah,
"Hey, you've done a lot of speaking and you've written a book. Like, can I talk to you about that? Because that's
yeah,
something I might want to do."
it's a two-way street, right? Those
Yeah.
relationships, you got to have equally yoked relationships. And so if
Hmm.
I just came to you and peppered you with 20 questions every single day about coaching and mentoring, that's nice for me. And you'd probably still want to help me because that's who you are. But
Totally.
boy,
Yeah.
if I can return that favor and you can start asking me questions of
Hmm.
what's it like writing a book, and what about the publishing process, and what's it like the keynote, man, that's the best for both of us because now we're equally yoked and we're both learning from one another. And so those are the relationships that always pay the biggest dividends, is to have those equally yoked relationships.
Well, I do think as we get further along in our careers, and both of you are kind of in that stage, right? That I mean, I notice, first of all, the things that I want out of my life are much simpler and different than they were when I was younger,
Yeah.
when I was in that
Yeah.
like building stage and
Yeah.
I want this title, I want this house, I want this, like all that. And it's like, no, I just want to be able to like have great conversations with people and feel like I was helpful and useful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And
funny. Somebody,
the more of those conversations I have, the more nourished I feel.
yeah, I had lunch with a long-term friend, a guy that I lived with, was one of my roommates prior marriage, and I was over in Tampa yesterday, and we grabbed lunch, and he was like, so, what are you doing these days? Like, tell me
Hmm.
about what you're doing. And he said to me afterwards, he's like, well, you kind of lit up on that. And it's because I'm so enjoying what I'm doing in this second curve now, that
Yeah.
I'm not striving to be, okay, well, how can I get the next promotion? How can I position my company? How can I increase our sales? Which is all wonderful things. And I so enjoy doing that. But I'm so leaning into this second curve now, where I wake up every day just saying, how can I help somebody else grow?
Right.
I did a small little book study. A company here in town said, hey, we'd like to do your book as a book study, and then could you come in and talk to us? I absolutely loved that. I mean, there were 10 people in a room, so I'm
Uh-huh.
not having a huge impact.
But it
In the
was a
old
book club and you were the book. That's
Yeah, and
awesome. Yeah.
and it was just like, it was, I'm not impacting 100 people. And the old Scott would be like, well, I'm not doing 10 people like that. I don't care if it's 3 people in a room. If
Yeah.
somebody walks out of there and says, wow, I got something from that conversation that I'm going to do differently, win. Like, that's a win for me. And so
Yeah.
I've so enjoyed this second curve that allows me the opportunity to just pour into others without any pretense of like, what am I going to get from this? Or can I put this on my resume? Can I put this out on my website? Doesn't matter to me. I just want to be able to help people grow. And if I can do that in small ways or big ways, I'm all in.
Well, you have a little bit of Brian Caffarelli in you in that you don't give yourself enough credit. I do want to ask you, you've had so many different steps during your career, and a lot of people who are listening to this, who are watching this, are founders, are thinking about building something, are in the midst of growth. Like, what's one lesson that you can offer them in that spirit of giving back? What's something that you think a founder should take from this conversation between us today?
Yeah, I would say anchor on relationships above all else.
Uh-huh.
Your business plan is critically important. Your financials are critically important. How you're growing your business is critically important. The people that are on your team are critically important. But don't see them as just people. Don't see those numbers. Don't see the business plan and you got framed on a wall. Like, you got to continue to invest in people and build the relationships with people, whether those are internal or whether those are external, because that is what is going to continue down the line. After all the numbers are gone, after
Hmm.
all the P&Ls are behind you, what you're going to be able to remember are those relationships. What you're going to be able to tap to is those relationships. What's going to buoy you is when you get a call from somebody that you worked with 10 years ago that was part of your team, that comes to you and says, thank you. Thank you for the
Yeah.
opportunity. Thank you. That's the stuff that carries you forward, because, we're not going to be buried with our P&Ls. We're not going to be buried with any of those things. But those relationships, those are the people that are going to show up at your funeral. Those are the people, you know what I mean? So like,
Yeah.
that's, I think, at the base of everything is just the relationship. So just always invest in relationships.
One last question. So there are people who are listening or watching to this, Scott, who might want you to come and speak. How should they reach out to you? What is the type of engagement that you feel like, yeah, I'm really a great fit for this, and I would love to come and talk about this with you. Like,
Yeah.
talk about
So
that for 30
yeah.
seconds or so.
Yeah, thank you for that. So it's scottmillson.com, Millson. So that's the best way to always get me, or look at me up on LinkedIn and send me a message on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active these days on LinkedIn, just trying to feed into others and helping others grow through some of the things that I can share. But in terms of the who or the what, if you've got an audience of a couple of people that want to grow, I'm in, I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to jump on a Zoom call. I'm happy to jump on a phone call. I'm happy to grab coffee if we're local or if I'm going to be in the area. But, and also if I have the ability to stand on a stage at a sales kickoff or at a leadership team retreat or whatever that is, if I can stand before people and be able to share something with them that somebody walks out and goes, I'm going to do something differently. I'm going to be better tomorrow than I was today as a result of something I heard. That's the audience I'm looking for. So anybody with a growth mindset that wants to grow and develop, I'm all in. Give me a holler and I'll be there, as soon as you tell me to.
Well, thank you. I think you did that for a lot of people just in our conversation today. And I really enjoyed having you, Scott. And we'll see you all next time on the Pick Now podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Munn, and take care.